Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Southampton, part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. My name is Greg Elliott, and as always, joined by my good friend and wonderful co-host, Zach Finch. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Not too bad.
Good. Today, we are going to do what all podcasts do and rip off a popular theory and make it our own. We're going to do the equivalent of Marvel's What If, but it's Saints What If. And based off of, recent interviews and events, we're going to do what if Russel Martin didn't get fired. It's going to be a controversial episode. I'm sure that we alone, in just between the two of us, have contrasting opinions. I'm just getting that vibe heading into it. But let's start with it. Did you see that interview, Zach? Have you just seen the clips?
I
watched the whole thing.
I didn't watch the whole thing. I listened to bits of it. Part of me, it does feel very weird that he's currently doing the media rounds, right? And it's either because the money's running out, which I find wild considering the amount of compensation he was probably paid, or alternatively, he's gearing himself up to get himself another job and trying to be like, wow, the reason being is I just wasn't backed, and that's why we didn't win. And I'm like. So I have a few opinions, but also I've also paid attention and watched all of the Zurich matches, and they weren't much better. So
yeah, I'm right there with it.
What insights do you have from these?
Look, I watched the whole thing, and it did make me feel more sympathetic towards Martin, to be honest, than perhaps I had been. I mean, it's still his fault; he was still too stubborn, right?
Yeah, this is
he doesn't dispute that. He still is stubborn enough in that belief, but some of the things he said are right. Some of our players aren't good enough. We did have a weak squad, and I hark back that I think that he got very unlucky quite early on, and that set the tone. Because I think back to some of the games, and there were 3 games that I can think of where bad VAR decisions ruined what would have been a win. And if he had those points by that point of that Spurs game, I don't think it turns like that, and I think maybe he does keep his job. I think that it's all of those things coming together, and as we look at this and talk about what if, the honest answer for me with what if is, at this point, when we're either flirting with relegation or relegated, truthfully, but building towards next season with Russel Martin at the helm is where I think we'd be at this point. I think if he survives that game, I don't think he, doesn't survive the rest of the season. Is genuinely my feeling on it. How? What about you? What are your thoughts on it, mate?
I think there's a lot of things. It's the signings that he was talking about not being backed. The signings that he wanted to make sure he got over the door. Aaron Ramsdale, which is a good signing to go over the door. Charlie Taylor, who didn't appear that much under Martin and has basically not appeared since, and at one point was talking about going to Hull. Ryan Fraser, who played a little bit under him, had a bad game against what I want to say Leicester, which caused him to probably get a bit of more flack than I think that he should have. But now he's just here collecting wages and hasn't played in forever. It doesn't mean I don't like the guy. It just means that ultimately he's not playing football and is being paid. And that shows you, and he's sort of putting a lot of the blame onto recruitments. Say a Spores is in charge and we suddenly get some really, really good players to play in those positions and we do a little bit better. Sure. If he'd stayed in charge, I think that, we would probably might have done slightly better. But one of the things that we'd have missed out on is, Chelsea's loan would have probably terminated Ugachukwu, I reckon. We'd have lost both of their players at that point. Adam Armstrong, I imagine, would probably have stayed because he would be playing significantly more. Whether or not Ben Brereton Diaz would be staying, who knows? Because it turns out he wasn't a Russel Martin pick. I think it changes the dynamic of the squad a lot, right? Like Sulemana and Onuachu realistically have broken through because they'd have been
gone in January, right?
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
By hook or by crook, they wouldn't be here.
So I think maybe we would have done slightly better. I think that we would have been slightly weakened, especially financially. I think that we could potentially get a bit more money for Sulemana and Onuachu in the summer this year than if we had tried to get rid of them in January because Martin had never played them. I don't think it would have had an effect on some other players. I don't think that we would, see a resurgence of Bella Kotchap or anything like that. I don't think that we would have seen the weird shoving in centre backs where centre backs weren't belonging, apart from when previously he'd done that. I don't think we'd have seen the falling out with Downs at the level that we saw
No, I agree.
either, because he was clearly not getting the game time behind Ugachukwu. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword in the sense that there are some players that have performed better that we wouldn't have expected to perform as good under Russel Martin. But likewise, there are players that have gone out and gone on loan and that probably would have performed better with him. It's whenever you have so somebody that studied history, as anyone who's long term knows, one of the alternative history is a fascinating talking point because ultimately it's a moot point, but it is interesting, especially in these sort of scenarios, to what would be hugely different. And I think maybe you're right. I don't think we're flirting with relegation. I think we're still relegated. I still think we're
do you
probably.
think we're still relegated this early? Like being the earliest relegated team in Premier League history, do you think that's still a milestone we hit with Russell Martin, or do you think we've got more points to get?
So after that Spurs game, what is going to change to make the further games not get worse, I think, is the big question for me. What would have been the catalyst for change? Would it have been we fight up to the international break and then maybe come back from that and do slightly better?
Well, let's not forget the games building up to that. There were also some real key players that were injured. Key Russell Martin players that were out with injury. Like we're talking Flynn Downs and
and obviously, but the problem with that as well is what we've discussed about in the first place, which is our squad depth is awful.
Yeah.
But the problem is that is something that a Russell Martin system, as you've pointed out as well, relies on because fitness is not the main forte. And we would continue to have these problems this season. We would continue to have these problems next season going into the Championship. I just don't think that he was the solution to any of the problems that we currently have or will have. And I think that we could potentially do exactly the same thing next season, go down, maybe do a right again with him. And then if we were to come back up, the naivety would still be there. Yeah, and alternatively, if they decided to bring someone in charge of footballing operations, which I think they were looking into doing before he was fired as well, what happens if we get to the end of this season and Spores goes, no, I don't want Martin in charge anymore? And then we end up having an entire season, because that is also a thing that very much could have happened. Because say we're in this position now where we're not quite relegated, we're bottom of the season, bottom of the table. I still think they probably would have made the decision later down the line, because if you're going to have somebody that's that stubbornly sticking to their principles and saying it's because the club isn't backing me to turn my team into Man City, despite the fact that that's never going to happen, is very, especially with the players that, I would feel more sympathy towards him and feel more sympathy that we would have done better if the players that he hadn't named as players that he definitely wanted to bring in, that he fought for, are players like Charlie Taylor, where I'm like, that's the extent of your Premier League ambition.
I agree. I think
that's where I think things like that, and Ryan Fraser, who we'd forgotten about by the time that, personally, me and you had forgotten about by deadline day, and then all of a sudden he was brought in, and you're like, oh man, yeah, no, you're right. So he can have a nice heart-to-heart and reunion with him and Adam
Armstrong. A player who was a surprisingly positive squad rotation player in the Championship, right?
Yeah.
Everyone was like, oh yeah, he comes on off the bench and does a good job, which is fine, and as a positive surprise, the league below. But yeah, I don't know.
This is my point: is that he didn't have Championship. The problem is he's talking about how he wasn't backed properly. But when you tell me the extent of your ambition is to sign Charlie Taylor and Ryan Fraser, Charlie Taylor, a left back who was from a being demoted Burnley team, I have to question what would have massively changed over the course of the season that could have resulted in us winning. Do I think we could have been better off? Yeah, for sure. Because I think that Juric did the same thing, but worse.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you get a word in edge.
No, that's fine. I think I agree with most of your points. I think we probably have enough points to not be the worst team. I think we'd be above.
We're like 15, 16. I don't think there'll be much between us.
See, I actually
We make Ipswich and Leicester look better. People have not paid attention to how bad they are.
The magic number I've put in my brain that I got to was actually only 13. So, yeah, I don't know. You're right. Oh, okay, I've got a rephrasing of the same question that focuses on a different thought path that might phrase it interesting. But first, a message from our partners at Bioniq.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN 2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now. Your body.
Okay, and we are back. Okay, I've changed my mind a bit. I think that the other way I was going to ask it is more interesting. I think.
Okay.
Would you take Russel Martin back next season? Proven that he can get a clearly poor Saints team promoted from the Championship up to the Premier League?
No, because I don't think that he learned his lesson. I don't think that firing him has learned it. I think he is gearing himself up to take charge of a Leicester or probably not an Ipswich. Wouldn't be surprised if he ends up at Leicester next season. And I worry that the same mistakes will be had. And I think I think he was fantastic at building a sense of positivity around the club after the absolute sort of tanking of relegation. But you can see from his sort of favourites club and sort of the boohooing management and these sort of, whilst it's really, really lovely, like I remember hearing that Joe Rothwell story about how he sent individual notes to the players and this and the other. The problem is like, look what happened then with Downs later, throw his toys out the pram because he didn't get to move to Ipswich, people going out on loan because they miss him so much. And it's like, when you have a figurehead like that is the focal point, right? Look at Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. Once you lose a figurehead like that, everything around it then collapses. I think of, this is a dumb, weird history comparison as well, but like Alexander the Great's empire, right? The instant that he died, it collapsed into 4 different empires. Where I'm at is that like a solution to a problem is not to bring something back, especially if those problems will not be fixed by bringing that person back in. And I think that the problems that we have as a club and the problems we have in a club culture will not simply be fixed by bringing Russel Martin back. I think maybe the fans wouldn't be mad about it. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I just don't see next time around what's going to be different.
Okay. I both agree and I disagree. I agree that we shouldn't take Russel Martin back, to be clear. Let's put that out on the table before anything gets misconstrued. I don't think it's a good idea him coming back. I disagree in the fact that I think that most fans wouldn't be happy with it, because I think that there's 2 trains of thought and both of them look bad. One is, why did we sack him in the first place if we do that? And the second becomes, the other train of thought is the same train of thought that got him fired in the first place, right? Like, what's it cheating?
I think it's more one of those things as a fan base, because of the recent success we had sort of 10 years down the line. We're incredibly nostalgic, right? So don't get me wrong, like I understand that's a phenomenon, like not just in our team. But if you talk to people like me and Oscar, like one of the things that Oscar was talking about off camera to me yesterday was like, oh, well, when I do an FPL, I'll pick loads of ex-Saints players. And as somebody that's played, FIFA, I'll bring back Romeu and Yoshida. And when I was down the Championship, at one point I bring in Wanyama. And it's like a weird thing, especially, but it seems very evident with Saints fans that we almost long for what we've had, right? But when it comes to like managerial appointments, like straight after Nathan Jones went, it was like, oh, I miss Hasenhüttl. And then when we were in with Sellers, it was like, may as well have just kept Hasenhüttl. This guy was done a disservice. Admittedly, I've not really seen the same sentiments as Nathan Jones, but also I have seen some people under Juric been like, maybe Nathan Jones wasn't given a good enough chance, which is probably true, to be clear.
I think that might be more of an indictment on Juric Ball than anything, to be honest, mate.
Yeah, there you go. So what I think's actually happened, and one of the reasons I think that there are nostalgic glasses that can be put on, that people want that same feeling that having the club under Russel Martin felt. And same thing with Hasenhüttl being sort of a very likable figure. Russel Martin was very, very charismatic. We swapped a very charismatic guy for a sort of blunt, older, Eastern European man who literally ruined Alfie House's life by giving him one-word interview answers for most of the questions that he asked at press conferences. From a guy that's clearly quite articulate, knows how to talk to people, is personable. And I think that what people actually miss kind of is that. But then when we have this, we end up building all these weird cults of personality around them, which is kind of what happened with Russell Martin, except it happened with the players a little bit too much, where now a lot of the players were like, they're playing for him. They shouldn't necessarily be playing for him. They should be playing because, one, it's their job, and two, it's their, they should be playing for the team that are paying their wages. It's not the manager that are paying out of pocket for them. And I understand that also that cult-like mechanics like that come into play in all walks of life. Like me and you, we have a really good boss who we get on with a lot. It's probably one of the main reasons we actually, in our job, if he left, we probably would also feel that way. And obviously these people are human, but I feel like that they're not going to be able to move on, and the club and the team isn't going to be able to move on from that if you don't change. You can't, because then also I don't think it would happen ever, because it would be admitting, wow, that was a huge mistake that we let him go, whilst also acknowledging that we took too long to let him go. It just seems it would be a really, really bizarre thing to take place. And I understand why people liked Russell Martin, and I understand why maybe he'll go on to be a really great manager one day, but his inability to adapt, be flexible, and I'm not a big fan of this kind of blaming it all on I just didn't get the backing, where I'm like, in fact, if anything, they backed you a little bit too much. That's why we're in this problem.
Yeah,
so
back in the wrong direction where the squad isn't good enough to be
maybe
fair.
We were doing slightly better. We'd still have it. And he said even he held his hands up to that. Maybe he showed a bit too much loyalty. Maybe we should have done a Nottingham Forest. Maybe we should have just broken financial fair play and took the hit when it came to fines and stuff. Because let's face it, that's the only way that we're really going to be able to stay in these sort of say competitive. But I just don't think that going back to him will be good for any party involved, because it will also I think that the time it would take for people to flip would be as much shorter fuse this time round as well. Like think what happens when we go down next season and we lose 5-0 to Preston because we've started playing out from the back again, and the new players aren't used to it as much, and then everyone's like, oh, here we go. And we had a leaky defence, and I don't think you can play that style. And he said he'd lived by the sword and he died by the sword. He died by the sword. You don't just get to, unfortunately, you just get to walk up from a battlefield and go straight back into fighting again. That's just not how it works. So
I'll take your word for it, mate. You're the history expert. I'll take your word on that one.
Often when people fall in battle, Greg, they don't get back up.
Really? Okay. I will come back to some closing thoughts, but first a message from our partners at Zencastr. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. Okay, so we're back. Look, taking a lot of your points on board, I think you're completely right. I don't know if, even thinking back on it, if we really would be in a better position if we hadn't have sacked him this season and we're sacking him now, or sacking him in the same way Juric has gone as soon as relegation confirmed. It'd be going out with that bit of a whimper either way, and I don't think that there are many managers that would have been able to do a lot better, to be honest.
But then also look at Leicester, right? And Ipswich have stayed with McKenna. because like Ipswich are in a bit of a different, in my opinion, unique position, right? They're with us. There is a level of expectation that is higher because we have been in the Premier League previously, not so long ago, and but at the same time, it's funny because Ipswich are one of the ones that actually came up, and they are higher than Leicester. But it's one of what was my point? I'm trying to get to my point. I've word saladed myself a little bit too hard with trying to explain all the philosophical and psychological points that I'm trying to make. But I think where I'm at is that with him going when he did, if anything, it should have been slightly earlier because it was the damage at that point had been done too much to the club. And it was, we are not willing to take the brutal levels of decisions that we used to. Like, I remember when we came up under Atkins and we were replaced by Pochettino, and I told you, I tell this story quite a lot, right? The whole photo in St Mary's in the snow with him with Foreign, that guy who never played for us, I want to say Finnish striker or Finnish defender, and people going, which one's the manager? And people thinking it was really hard done by Atkins at that point. I think maybe that their loyalty to him, because he's so charismatic, was able to convince them that yes, I can do it if you just keep believing in me, and hoped that the players would do it. Hadn't worked out, will not work out in the future. Maybe if he'd stayed, maybe we get the extra win against it. I think we probably would have beaten Ipswich again. Maybe we have another couple of points, but I don't think it's a huge difference, which means, looking back at it, was he doomed from the start? Maybe.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he did us a good job in the Championship, and I feel like maybe at that point it would have been the best decision. Or you do what Ipswich had done and keep the manager, but like at the same time, I just think that that was more extraordinary, right, than what Russel Martin did. He took a Premier League quality, or 50% Premier League quality squad when he took charge, and managed to make us finish fourth, when realistically we should have been probably third at least, or maybe higher considering the games that we'd had up to that point.
Yeah, and you think of some of the results and the amount of draws. Yeah, I agree completely. I want to close on a shorter form question.
Sure.
We saw Russel Martin. We talked about his sort of friendliness with the players and his belief system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely some players that have benefited from that, right? And one of those players, or two of those players, Flynn Downs and Tyler Diblin. Now it's very clear Flynn Downs didn't get along with Juric, and it might be reading between the lines a bit too much. It might just be a little bit of a dip in form. It might have been brought back too early from injury, but I don't think it's unreasonable to say that Tyler Diblin didn't perform as well under Juric as he did under Russel Martin. So I guess the short form question is, if in this mythical universe Russel Martin had stayed, what price tag do you think we'd be putting on Tyler Diblin at this point in the season? If his form continued to improve with that sort of arm round approach?
I already think 100 million is absolutely insane. However, I do think that if Russel Martin wanted him to be a key player for him for the future, and he enjoyed playing under Russel Martin, I feel like it would just be a not for sale sign instead of a price tag. Yeah. Because the price tag is obviously meant to be.
Do you not think it is?
We've discussed this before. The price tag is a not for sale sign, but also I feel like if someone comes in at 60 million, we'll sell him, right? I have a feeling that if Russel Martin had stayed and we went back down and he had put his arm around and said, this guy is not going anywhere, they would have just trigger that contract extension and just tell him. And I don't think he'd be potentially as bothered. Who knows? It's hard to get into the psychological space of an 18-year-old who, a newer 18-year-old who has gone from, and I alluded to this in yesterday's episode, gone from sort of having his debut this season to then being told he's worth £100 million. It's got to mess with your head a little bit. Because to be honest, it could just be that has resulted in a dip of form. Is all of a sudden the weight and expectation is insane.
We saw earlier in the season Sulemana have an interview that alluded to the same things, right? And that part of the reasons he was struggling were the pressures that come of being, the club record signing. And
the beginning of the season, Diblin had freedom to play, right? As well.
I get that. It's definitely easy to overthink and overwork situations because of that, right? You can put yourself in where you're in a situation where you're almost trying too hard. You need to get out of your own way and fall back on instinct, and sometimes that's it's easier said than done.
answer to your other question about Downs, I don't think there's a price tag on him either, because I don't think there would be an interest in him in leaving. I think he would be still quite happy to be here, especially if he's playing a key role. And I think and I wouldn't be surprised if he's seeing Adam Armstrong go out on loan, he's seeing Ben Brereton Diaz leave, he's seeing all that other going on around him. He's just like, do you know what? There's some interest in me. I don't want to be here anymore either. Because again, a lot of it was playing for the specific manager, so it's having
it's clearly a clash in personality.
Yeah, but this is the thing, is that when you this is the other problem we have when you steer from this sort of gentile kind, but firm figure, or somebody that cares deeply and makes sure the players know they're cared for, which was similar to what we did with Hasenhüttl, and then you right turn and pivot into a Nathan Jones who's just like, shut up, you're all rubbish. My team would do so much better. I'm pound for pound the best manager in Europe. Or alternatively, a Juric, where it's like, yeah, I'm not listening to what you say. You play football and do good, right? And like the contrast and shift, that from a human perspective, that's got to be jarring. And we said, hopefully, it would be good. And for some players, it was good, because the people that weren't the favourites managed to go, well, I'll just impress in training. I'll get my head down. I'll say nothing. For the players that are used to having that sort of extra bit of comfort, their form dipped. And that's just going to be kind of how that works, because the managerial styles are so different. So then what do? You should probably have found somebody maybe that was slightly better in the middle ground. But again, as we pointed out before, what they did was get the first book they found, the first name they had in their little book of managers, which was Juric. And so, yeah, if you're looking at a what-if scenario, I think that the players who came in under Russel Martin would be doing better. Maybe Ryan Fraser would have been appearing more this season. Maybe he would have scored more. Who knows? I think that's one of the beautiful parts of the what-if question. But I certainly don't think
I'll tell you one thing, Zach, that I do know is that if Russel Martin had stayed, we probably wouldn't have won the Premier League.
Do you reckon we would have gone further in the cups, or were we already out of all of them by that point? I can't remember.
Mate, don't even know. Doesn't matter. Look, we're nearing the end of this season. We've got 6 games more to suffer through now. So
I will be forever thankful for the moments of togetherness that he brought to the club. I'll be forever thankful for that day out in Wembley. I'll be forever thankful for the fact that it made the championship season slightly more exciting. The problem is that because of that feeling and that vibe, it covered up a lot of the cracks that unfortunately 100%. Were just absolutely exposed from the beginning of the season up until this second.
There's part of me that wishes
you wish it worked out.
I wish that he would have been more pragmatic because I don't hate. I hate the philosophy of football, and that's well established on the podcast. Go and listen to how Pep Guardiola ruined football.
It's twice.
It's out there for everyone to hear, but I don't think that the philosophy that Russel Martin imposes is a bad base for a more pragmatic approach.
Yeah, if he was slightly more pragmatic, if he'd been backed as well.
If you take that as the base and build upon that, and you allow a bit more versatility, and you just go with it with a bit more tactical wherewithal, I wish that it had been better, because I like him as a person, and I enjoyed a lot of the things not based on the football that he did with the club.
And that for me is the real kicker, and that's why we are sad for people like Atkins when he got fired, and we were sad for Hasenhüttl, because you could tell how much he cared, and that's why we are not as warm to Juric, who he was sort of happy to be here, but you didn't really see it. And Nathan Jones, who saw it more as an opportunity to play in the Premier League, but a lot of that was, by the looks of it, covering up.
I would go one step further and say Nathan Jones, who actively went out of his way to show that he didn't enjoy his time.
Yeah, but I think also but when he was here, I think part of it was covering up the fact that he felt like, I don't know if you've seen the interviews where he was talking about how he's like, oh, well, I was worried about what to say because he's a Premier League player. So I'm like, the fact that you went in with that mentality meant you lost the battle as soon as it was.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the problem. And it's the fact that he was a personable manager, that was a nice guy, and cared about the club and cared about the people. That's great.
Yeah.
But unfortunately,
if only he knew how to coach a football team.
Unfortunately, if I'm a really nice guy and like, you know, we talk about our boss, who we won't name, but we really like working under him. One of the other reasons we get to work under him, and one of the reasons that we're still in this team, is because the team is successful. If the team was unsuccessful, like him or not, he probably wouldn't be in charge of our team. And that is the key difference, is that it was not being successful. And you can ask for more time, and oh boy, howdy was he given more time. And he asked for more backing. And I think, you know, they could have had a better recruitment strategy at that point, but maybe he should have rang the alarm bells significantly louder and put that out in the press earlier on. Because, you know, if he was saying before the season started, well, the problem is that we're not really going to get any good players in, and the club get annoyed with him. At least at that point, it's in the open. It's not, you know, I want to protect all the players and I want to. But he said, you know, himself that he relied on the players that he brought up that weren't strong enough. So it's a double-edged sword. But he was a 100%. Nice guy who I wish all the best for, but no, not back, because that's just it's learning nothing from the past, is it?
100%.
We'll see him at Leicester next season. It's fine. When they fire Ruud van Nistelrooy, who could have been in charge of us. Is it Van Nistelrooy who's in charge? Yeah.
It is Van Nistelrooy, yes, mate. Yeah.
Good.
I mean, I saw some Saints fans call him for that, and that's why fans aren't in boards of football clubs, mate, because it could have been us. I mean,
people like me, overly emotional.
To addition to what if would Van Nistelrooy been a worse manager for us than Jurich? Probably not. Doesn't matter, does it? It's irrelevant.
I don't think he would have signed for us, if I'm totally honest.
Exactly.
This is like the whole thing with like, well, we should have got David Moyes in. I'm like, Clip specifically came out of his way and said he didn't want to. He wasn't involved in that. Didn't want to be involved in our club, and that's upsetting because of a multitude of reasons. Thank you for your time, Russel Martin. I don't think you would have saved us from relegation.
I'm right there with you. I agree with the sentiment entirely. Well, we can do nothing now except look forward. That's what we can do. And the next thing we have to look forward to is a game of football at the weekend.
Oh, is it looking forward to it?
I mean,
can I look past it?
No, because that is not how football works. We will be back tomorrow as we cast our eyes onto that game. Until then, thank you very much for listening. Let us know your thoughts. Would we have stayed up if Russel Martin stayed in charge? I feel like I know a lot of the responses to that already, but I look forward to hearing them. Let us know on all of the socials, your Blue Sky, TikTok, X, Facebook, Instagram, all of them. Give us a comment. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then.
Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.